Hey everybody, hopefully you remember me. I'm Katie Swift, one of the reference librarians here at Campbell, and today we're going to talk about legislative history research. Legislative history is the life story of a law. It's how a law was created, changed, and or shaped as it went through the legislative process. And you use legislative history when a law is not entirely clear on a point that you need it to be. So if you're not sure how a law would apply in your particular situation, it's helpful often to go back and see what the legislature's intent was in passing that law. So you can try and find statements during the process in which the law was being created to see what they would want to do in your situation, what their intent was. Doing legislative history research is a two-step process. The first is to identify the documents that were produced as the proposed legislation made its way through the legislative process, or as I like to say, where's the paper? As a bill becomes a law, it goes through multiple steps, and along each of those steps there's usually some kind of written byproduct that comes from that, and those can be really helpful in determining legislative intent. The second step is to read them and see what they say. So where's the paper and what did it say? You want to look for statements of legislators or noteworthy individuals and see if you can find anywhere in there any statements that support what you're trying to say. Hopefully you're all familiar with the legislative process, but if you are like me when I entered law school, my education began and ended with the I'm just a bill song. So I just wanted to throw this up to refresh you how a bill becomes a law. It's introduced in either the House or the Senate. It goes to committee, usually goes to multiple committees, and those committees may hold a hearing. They usually issue a report, and then it goes to the floor for floor debate. That's the C-SPAN channel when you see a congressman standing in a mostly empty room talking about whatever bill it is he's supporting. And then the bill is passed, and it goes to the other house. In this diagram, it goes from House to Senate, but it can, of course, go the other way, and it goes through the same process. There are a lot of different documents that are created in the making of a law. We're only going to talk about the four most important. I just want you to be aware that there's other ones out there. So today we're going to be talking about bills, committee hearings, the congressional record, which is a transcript of the floor debates, and House or Senate reports, also known as committee reports. Bills are essentially the rough draft of the law. Different versions of a bill are helpful because they can show legislative intent through the changes that are made in them. So during the legislative process, as it goes from where it's introduced to the committee, and then committee to the floor, committee to another committee, changes can be made. And if you look at those changes, you can try and figure out what the legislature intended by doing that. So you can argue that if a change was made in a bill, it was probably done deliberately. So here are a bunch of places where different versions of a bill can turn up. So I want to show you an example. This is real. I just did a quick search in Westlaw. Sydney Coal Company versus Social Security Administration. This case actually turned on whether the change from a plaintiff to the plaintiff was deliberate on the part of the legislature, and whether they meant to do that change. And actually a point of law, whether venue was proper, depended on this change from A to the. They actually lost, but you can see here, this is an actual screenshot from the opinion, and down here, footnote 11, you can see the court discussing their argument and why they came out the way they did. So this actually does happen. That legislative intent arguments are made in court. Next, we're going to talk about committee hearings. And hearings are when committees will call in experts to give their opinion on the bill that's being passed. So ask them what they think will happen, do they think it's necessary, just kind of their opinion so that they can get experts to weigh in. They can have not just the oral or written statements of the witnesses, they'll also have transcripts of the verbal question and answer, any reports or exhibits that the witness brings in to be put on the record, and then correspondence and materials by other interested parties. So anything that's sort of in the course of this investigation they hold at the hearings may turn up. So here's an example. They called in an expert, Colonel Sanders, and he spoke before Congress on the Active Americans over 65 Speak on Retirement Age Policies before the Committee on Aging. So you can see here, this is a transcript of his statement. The third type is the congressional record. The congressional record is the official record of the proceedings, debates, and activities of Congress. Mostly it's a transcript of whatever happens on the floor. So here's a page here. Oh, well, we'll show you where it happens. So there, kind of at the end. And here's an example of a page. So it's kind of broken up. Down here you'll see what the topic is that they were discussing next. And then kind of an introduction, and then here Mr. Mansfield starts making his statement. And it's just a transcript of what he said, and then he actually had the committee report read into the record. So that turns up here as well. The last and most important are committee reports, called House or Senate reports, depending on which house they originated in. These are the most authoritative. These are the official publications by which congressional committees make recommendations whether to pass or not a law to either the House or the Senate. They can include lengthy and detailed analysis of each section of the legislation. So they'll have a section of the legislation, then an explanation for why they chose that. You could see why that would be helpful. Then they might have a summary of issues that came out in the hearing, and often they'll show the history of the law, why they think this legislation is important. They'll give you kind of background information on the state of the union as far as that issue is concerned. And then often there'll be additional minority or supplemental views. So if the committee is not unanimous, they'll often have like a minority view, kind of like a minority opinion in a court case. And then there's another kind of report called a conference report. Often the House and the Senate will pass similar laws, but they won't be exactly the same. There'll be some differences. And they will convene a conference committee to come together and discuss the two versions and settle on an ultimate merged version. And that too will often have explanations for why they chose the language that they did. So here are the reports. So how do you find all these documents? To do that, we have to do a little bit of review first. Hopefully you all remember this because we just covered it in statutes, but again, I'm just going to refresh your memory. How a bill becomes law and how that law is codified. So when a bill is introduced into Congress, it's assigned a bill number. These are in chronological order by session of Congress, and it's going to be either marked as a House bill or a Senate bill, depending on where it was introduced. So here I've got an example of a citation for each film. House of Representatives 234. So that's the 234th bill introduced in the House of Representatives that session. And then Senate is just S334. And here is what a bill looks like. And there it is, big number right on top. After that bill is passed, it's given a public law number. This is going to be the year of Congress plus a number in chronological order in which that bill was passed into law. Excuse me. So the first law of the 112th Congress is going to be PL 112-1. The 50th law would be PL 112-50. That law is then printed as a pamphlet, just a little paper booklet, and that's called the slip law. And then a bunch of those are gathered together and republished in the statutes at large. And that looks like this. Big set of books, and all they do is collect public laws in their entirety as they were passed. Then they're given a citation in this as well. So they'll have the public law number and then a citation to statutes at large. If you see my example on the screen, it's 75 Stat 424. That first number is going to be the volume number. So this is volume 62, and then the second number is going to be the page number that you'll find that public law. So here is an example of a public law in the statutes, or a session law in the statutes at large. Here's this page citation. Here is the public law number, and then here you'll see is the bill number, the original bill. The two most important numbers are going to be this bill number and this public law number, but often you'll see on databases an opportunity to use that statutes at large number. So anytime you're doing legislative history research, just write these three numbers down because they're very important. The session law is then picked apart and reorganized into the United States Code. And here is just a little snippet from the United States Code. So often when you're doing research, you know what the law is. So you'll have that citation to the United States Code or state law, but we'll get to that. And at the bottom of the law, so this is a small snippet from the United States Code. It's not the whole page, but you'll see at the bottom of this section where I've got the yellow arrow pointing, it says added Public Law 102-519. So this is the public law number for the law that created this. And then you'll see at the end there is the statutes at large citation. So you can look up this public law on that page of the statutes at large. And that's going to be really where you start your trail. And then once you're in the statutes at large, you can get the bill number. So this sends you to the statutes at large, you're in the statutes at large, and you get that bill number. So what good does that do you? You've got these numbers, the bill number, the statutes at large number, the public law number, and what do you do with those? There are a lot of different resources for conducting legislative history research. As I'm sure you can probably guess, there is a massive collection of materials, just because there is so much paper produced in the creation of a law. Most databases do not have all of this paper. They have different chunks of it in different places. That is even more true the more you go back in time. The older laws are even trickier. Fortunately, there are a couple of government websites that have done their best to to collect this information, make it publicly available for free for the more recent years. And these are the ones that you're going to be using in your assignment. The first and most important is congress.gov, which until recently was known as Thomas, so you might still see that on some publications. Congress.gov was created by the Library of Congress, and its whole purpose was to make federal legislative history materials available to the public. It's the single best and most authoritative free resource for federal legislative history. Its biggest shortcoming is its limited time range. At best, information is only collected back to the 1970s, and many of the collections are much shallower, only the last decade or so. So let's go take a look at congress.gov. Congress.gov is primarily arranged around bill number, meaning usually it will recognize a bill number and return the materials you're looking for. I've had some luck using a public law number and pretty much none using a statute at large citation. This is still in beta right now, so I'm hoping that they will fix that and recognize all three citations, but for now, try to use the bill number. You may search by keyword, but I really don't recommend it. So for example, if you're interested in the legislative history of the Affordable Care Act, you could type in, like the example they have here, healthcare. I really don't recommend it. It's inefficient, and really, why? Every single time I have done legislative history research, I know the law that I'm interested in. So why won't I just take that extra half step, get the bill number, and go right there? Now notice that congress.gov defaults to current legislation. That means the current legislative session. So if you searched now without changing this, you're only going to get results from the current session. So usually the first thing you want to do is switch this to all legislation. So let's input our bill now using either HR or S, depending on whether it's from the House of Representatives or the Senate, and hit search. Now remember, bills are numbered chronologically and reset each session. So that means there's going to be a lot of HR 4212, one for every legislative session that introduced that many bills. So you want to filter over here by year. So let's pick 112. And here we go. We have one result, a real barn burner, the Drywall Safety Act of 2012. So let's click there. All right, here is the legislative history for HR 4212, Drywall Safety Act of 2012. This is a brief summary. So we have the sponsor, the committees, the latest action. So this one was made into a law, but if it hadn't been, say, otherwise. Major recorded votes, and then here's the tracker. So this is sort of a visual representation of what has happened as this bill became a law. Next, you'll see these tabs. These contain the actual legislative history. So first we have a summary. These are written by the Congressional Research Service, and they just summarize what the bill is about. The next is text, and this is where you'll find the most recent text of the bill. So this one's been passed into law, so this is going to be the version of the bill that was actually passed, but if it wasn't passed, if it's still in committee, whatever the most recent version of the bill would be here. This page is particularly important because you can see all the versions of the bill. So you'll see here it says there are 5 versions of the bill, and you can go to any one of these. Remember when I said earlier that if there has been a change in a bill as it has gone through Congress, you can argue that any change was made deliberately. So if a section was deleted or if a section was added, when you go to court, you can argue that that change was deliberate, and that can give you some insight into legislative intent. So that's why these earlier bills can be important. Next, you have actions. This is basically a list of each step that the bill has taken on its way to becoming a law. On the left, you can sort by major actions, or all actions, including floor amendments. So let's go to that one so we get a longer list. So you can see all the things that have happened to this bill. And if there are documents associated with it, then it's hyperlinked. So you'll see here it says became public law. You can click on that and actually see the public law. All of these citations are citations to the congressional record. So this would actually take you to pages in the congressional record where that bill was discussed. Next, we have titles. This is just different names that were used for your bill. So the Senate might call it one thing, the House might call it something else, maybe given a third short title when it's passed, and they're all going to be listed here. After that is amendments. If any amendments were made to the bill as it passed through the House and the Senate, they would be added here. Co-sponsors, these are all the people that sponsored a bill. And here are committees. So these are any committee actions. So these are the committees that the bill was referred to. If they had any reports, they're noted here, and those are pretty important with hyperlinks. Also, remember this page, because when I show you how to find congressional hearings in a minute, you need to know which committee and date that you're looking for. So you need this sort of snippet of information to find any committee hearings. I'm going to show you how to do that in a minute. And then if there are any related bills, this one doesn't have any, but there are any related bills, they would be under this tab. One important piece of legislative history materials that Congress.gov does not have are congressional hearings. Fortunately, there is another website called FedSys that does have congressional hearings. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on FedSys because it's not nearly as good as Congress.gov. And really the only time that you're probably going to use it is for congressional hearings. What is FedSys? FedSys was created by the Government Printing Office. This is the office that's responsible for publishing and disseminating federal government documents. So, for example, the United States Code, the session laws, these are all printed by the Government Printing Office and sent out. FedSys.gov is not as good as Congress.gov for legislative history. They have a lot of the same content, although Congress.gov tends to go back further. But FedSys is not organized the way that Congress.gov is. Congress.gov was created around the idea that they wanted to make federal legislative history available. GPO was sort of, as far as I can tell, organized with the idea of let's just print everything, put it up on the web. They haven't aggregated all the information by a particular bill and displayed it together the way that Congress.gov is. Let's take a look at what they do have. Here is a list of everything they have and their coverage dates. You'll notice most of it's from sort of the mid-90s, early 90s, I think 104th, it's like 1995, 1997, somewhere in there. And you can click on any of these and browse. The one that I want to show you, however, is congressional hearings. Oh, here we go. So here's FedSys's congressional hearings collection. You'll notice it is organized by session of Congress and then by House. And then within House, you'll see all the committees. So that's why I told you on Congress.gov it's important to pay attention to which committee your bill is referred to. And then you can click on one of these and you'll get a list of all the hearings that they had. Just because a bill was referred to a committee does not mean that they held a hearing. So you're not going to find a hearing on every single bill. In fact, quick way, we'll do Control F, see if there was anything on drywall. And there wasn't a hearing, at least in this committee, for that. And then if you click on the PDF, you'll get a PDF or text. Usually you're going to want the PDF. It's nicer to read and it's less likely to be any typos. Let's see if one will load. Sometimes they take a while. Okay, so let's review. So when you use Congress.gov, you use Congress.gov when you're researching the legislative history of a bill or law from the past 30 years-ish, preferably more recent than that, and you need to do it for free. We have other databases that we pay for that are pretty spiffy, but this is how you're going to do it for free. And when do you use FEDSIS? You use FEDSIS primarily when you need a congressional hearing as part of your legislative history. Or you can use it when you know the specific document you're looking for. So if you're looking for a particular committee print, then you can use FEDSIS for that. And lastly, you can use it if you've already looked in congress.gov and couldn't find anything. Then because there is differences in the collection between what FEDSIS has and congress.gov has, you may find materials in FEDSIS that were not available in congress.gov. Doesn't cost you anything but a few minutes to check. Okay, lastly, North Carolina legislative history. North Carolina has legislative history similar to the federal, except it is much less robust. Not nearly as much information as is created in the federal version. There are way fewer documents, and less of them are available online. And so a lot of times you'll have to do it in print, but even the print materials are not widely disseminated. Fortunately, we are right around the street from the state legislative library, and they are the home of all these materials, literally walking distance. So we're not going to go in depth on how to do North Carolina legislative history. I just want you to keep in mind that it's kind of a similar process as the federal. You probably need to do it in print at the state legislative library. And the state legislative library created a terrific guide, and it is step by step. Start here if you know the year or session the bill was introduced. Start here if you know the statute section. Start here if you know the bill number. And then it walks you through exactly what to do in these situations. And that is pretty much it. As always, if you have any questions whatsoever on conducting legislative history research, do not hesitate to stop by and see Stephen or myself. It's really complicated. This was just a very basic overview, and we do not mind answering questions whatsoever. Thank you, everybody.